Did you know that one of the most dangerous love stories ever filmed almost never made it to the screen at all? For over a decade, Hollywood was too afraid to touch it. The story was too dark, too raw, and too honest. But when it finally arrived in 1946, it changed movies forever. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about The Postman Always Rings Twice. Number 20. The book Hollywood was afraid to touch. James M. Cain wrote the novel The Postman Always Rings Twice back in 1934. It was a short book. It was a dangerous book. It told the story of a drifter, a beautiful woman, and a murder they planned together. People loved it. They read it on trains, in cafes, and under the covers late at night. But Hollywood? Hollywood was terrified. The story was about adultery, crime, and getting away with it, at least for a while. The censors at the time had a very strict set of rules called the Hays Code. This code decided what movies could and could not show. Murder could be in a film, but criminals had to be punished. Love could be in a film, but it had to be pure. Cain's book broke every single one of those rules. Studios passed on it again and again. MGM bought the rights, but then sat on them for years like a stone too heavy to lift. Producers whispered about it in back rooms. Writers tried to find ways to clean it up. None of them could figure out how to keep the darkness and still sneak it past the censors. 12 years passed. 12 long years. Meanwhile, the book kept selling. It was translated into dozens of languages. It became one of the most read crime novels in the world. And all that time, Hollywood just waited. When the film finally got made in 1946, the whole industry held its breath. It looked polished and proper on the outside, but the danger was still there, hiding just beneath the surface. What looked safe on screen had claws underneath. Number 19. The white costume that changed everything. When costume designer Irene put Lana Turner in all white for her first scene, nobody in the room expected what happened next. Lana Turner played Cora Smith, a woman trapped in a roadside diner, married to a man she does not love, dreaming of something bigger and better. Director Tay Garnett wanted the audience to feel something the moment they saw her. He wanted them to understand everything about Cora without a single word being spoken. So Irene dressed her entirely in white. White shorts, white halter top, white turban, even white shoes. In a film full of shadows and secrets, Cora glowed like a flame. The choice was bold, and it was smart. White, in the language of film, usually means innocence. But here, it meant something else entirely. It was a costume that lied. Cora looked pure. Cora looked like someone who needed saving. But Cora was already planning. The white was a disguise. It was armor. It was bait. Lana Turner later said she had no idea how powerful that entrance would be. She walked into the scene, picked up a tube of lipstick from the floor, and looked up into the camera. That was it. That one moment told the whole story. The audience understood immediately who this woman was and what she wanted. Tay Garnett said the white costume was one of the best decisions ever made on that film. It was not his idea, not the writer's idea. It belonged entirely to Irene. One designer, one color, one costume. What looked like simplicity was actually genius. Number 18. Lana Turner was not the first choice. Lana Turner is so closely linked to Cora Smith that it feels impossible to imagine anyone else in the role. But the truth is, she was not MGM's first choice, not even close. When the studio finally decided to move forward with the film, they had a long list of actresses they wanted to consider. Hedy Lamarr's name came up. She was glamorous, mysterious, and had the kind of screen presence that could hold an audience still. There were others, too, names that were big at the time but have since faded from memory. The studio went back and forth. Lana Turner was 25 years old at the time. She had already made a name for herself, but she had never carried a film quite like this one. This was not a light romantic comedy. This was not a musical or a cheerful wartime story. This was something heavy and real and morally complicated. Some people inside the studio doubted she could handle it. They worried she was too bright, too glamorous, too much of a movie star to disappear into a desperate woman like Cora. But Lana Turner surprised everyone. She brought something raw and hungry to the role. She made Cora feel real. She made you feel sorry for her, even when she was doing terrible things. That is a hard thing to do. After the film came out, no one remembered the doubt. No one talked about the other names on the list. There was only Lana Turner. There was only Cora. What started as uncertainty became one of the most iconic performances of the entire decade. Number 17, John Garfield. Almost Walked Away. John Garfield played Frank Chambers, the drifter who falls into Cora's trap and helps her plan a murder. He was electric in the role, restless, charming, and dangerous in a very quiet way. But before filming began, Garfield was not sure he wanted to do it. John Garfield had built a reputation for playing tough working-class men who fought against a system that kept them down. He identified with those characters deeply. Frank Chambers was different. Frank was not a fighter for justice. Frank was weak in the way that desire makes a person weak. He let a woman pull him into something unforgivable. He chose lust over reason. Garfield worried that audiences would not connect with Frank the way they connected with his other characters. He also had concerns about the script and how faithful it was to the darkness of Cain's original novel. He pushed back. He asked questions. He had long conversations with the director and the producers. Eventually, something in the material got under his skin. He saw something true in Frank, the way an ordinary man can be completely undone by the wrong love at the wrong moment. Garfield signed on, and from the first day on set, it was clear he had made the right decision. He and Lana Turner had a kind of chemistry that felt almost dangerous to watch. It was electric, it was uncomfortable, it was exactly right. The tension between them did not need to be performed. It was just there, sparking every time they shared the frame. What felt like reluctance became one of the defining roles of his career. Number 16. The director wore a cast the whole time. Director Tay Garnett broke his leg before filming started. That is not a small thing. Directing a movie means being on your feet all day. It means moving around the set, checking angles, leaning in to watch the actors, standing behind the camera for hours. Tay Garnett did all of that on crutches. He directed the entire film in a cast. The crew watched him hobble from one end of the set to the other, never complaining, never slowing down. On some particularly difficult days, he had to be helped into position. But he never stopped working. He never asked to delay production. He later joked that the broken leg might have actually helped him. It forced him to be still, to sit close to the actors and watch them more carefully than he might have otherwise. Instead of moving around the set restlessly, he had to choose his moments. He had to commit to angles before he saw them from every possible direction. That stillness, he believed, gave the film a kind of controlled intensity that matched the story perfectly. The Postman Always Rings Twice is a film about people who are trapped. The main characters are trapped by desire, by poverty, by circumstance. And here was the man behind the camera, literally unable to move freely, shaping their story from a place of physical limitation. It was an accident that became a method. What looked like a setback quietly became part of the film's soul. Number 15, The Hays Code. Battle was fierce. Getting the postman always rings. Twice past the censors was not a simple negotiation. It was a war. The Hays office, which enforced the rules of what could and could not appear in Hollywood films, reviewed the script with a very sharp eye. They had already rejected earlier attempts to adapt Cain's novel. They knew the story. They knew what it was really about. The script went back and forth multiple times. Scenes were rewritten. Dialogue was changed. Certain moments that existed in the book had to be removed entirely or softened until they were almost unrecognizable. The censors insisted that the guilty characters be punished by the end. They insisted that the film not appear to glamorize murder or adultery. The screenwriters, Harry Ruskin and Niven Bush, had to perform a very delicate balancing act. They needed to keep enough of the novel's heat to make the film worth watching. But they also needed to satisfy the Hays office, or the film would never be released at all. What they produced was a script that hid its meaning in glances and pauses and the space between words. The darkness was still there. The desire was still there. The moral ugliness was still there. But it was dressed up carefully. It wore a suit and tie. It spoke politely. And somehow it fooled the censors just enough. When audiences saw the finished film, they understood everything the script had been forced to hide. The meaning came through the silences. What the dialogue could not say, the actors said with their eyes. Number 14. The filming location was almost not California. The story of the Postman Always Rings Twice takes place at a small roadside diner somewhere along a California highway. It feels dusty and real and forgotten, the kind of place where the world passes by and never stops. But the production team had a surprisingly difficult time finding the right location. They scouted many different sites. Some were too polished, some were too remote. Some did not match the feeling of the script, that sense of being just close enough to civilization to dream about escape, but just far enough away to feel completely alone. The diner finally chosen was a real working establishment. The crew had to negotiate with the owner, work around regular business hours in the early days of preparation, and modify the space carefully to make it feel lived in and worn down in exactly the right way. Set designers added layers of grime, age, and exhaustion to a place that was already imperfect. They wanted the diner to feel like a trap, a beautiful trap, because Cora was there, but a trap nonetheless. The dusty road outside, the neon sign, the greasy counter, all of it was built to feel like a world with no easy exits. The location became one of the most important characters in the film. You understood immediately why Frank might stop there, and you understood just as immediately why Cora had never been able to leave. What looked like a simple background was actually a carefully built cage. Number 13. Cecil Kellaway's Brilliant Humanity. Cecil Kellaway played Nick Smith, Cora's husband. On paper, Nick could have been a villain. He was the obstacle standing between the two people the story followed. He was older, simpler, and completely unaware that his wife was falling in love with another man and planning his death. But Kellaway played Nick with such warmth and sweetness that audiences genuinely liked him. That was the most uncomfortable part of watching the film. Nick was not cruel. Nick was not mean. He was cheerful and kind and completely in love with his wife in his simple, honest way. Kellaway brought a gentle humor to the role that made Nick feel entirely real. He told small jokes. He fussed about his cat. He made plans for the future with an innocent excitement that was painful to watch, knowing what the audience knew. When the worst moment came for his character, the film did not linger. But the impact was enormous because Kellaway had done his job so well. He had made the audience care. He had made Nick a person, not just a plot device. That was a far harder acting challenge than playing Frank or Cora. Those characters had passion to fuel them. Nick only had goodness, and goodness, Kellaway seemed to understand, is its own kind of power. The film would not have worked without him. He was the moral weight at the center of everything. What looked like a minor supporting role was actually the heart of the whole story. Number 12. The title has nothing to do with a postman. Almost everyone who watches The Postman Always Rings Twice asks the same question sooner or later. Where is the postman? There is no postman in the story. There is no ringing twice. The title seems to have nothing to do with anything that happens on screen. James M. Cain was asked about this many times throughout his life, and his answers were never quite the same twice. One version of the story he told was this: when he was waiting to hear back from his publisher about whether the book would be accepted, the postman would come each day and ring the bell. If there was no letter, the postman would ring once and leave. But when there was a letter, something important, something that would change things, the postman would ring a second time to make sure someone came to the door. Cain said the title was about fate, about the way life gives you a warning before something big and terrible arrives, about the second chance that is not really a chance at all, but a final reckoning. Other people have interpreted it differently over the years. Some believe it means that punishment always comes eventually, maybe not the first time, but it will come back around. It will ring twice. Whatever Cain intended, the title stuck. It became one of the most famous titles in all of American literature and cinema. Strange, mysterious, and slightly unsettling, just like the film itself. What sounded like a riddle was actually the whole story in 4 words. Number 11. The film was made during a very difficult time. 1946 was the year the Second World War had just ended. Soldiers were coming home. Families were trying to put themselves back together. The country was exhausted and hopeful at the same time. And into this moment walked a film about desire, betrayal, and murder. The timing was not an accident. Post-war America was full of tension underneath the surface of celebration. Men had seen terrible things. Women had been alone for years, working, waiting, managing. The old certainties about home and family and love were not as solid as they used to be. Films called film noir, dark, shadowy stories about crime and desire, were becoming more and more popular. They spoke to something that could not quite be said in polite conversation. The Postman Always Rings Twice arrived at exactly the right moment. It was a story about wanting more than what you had, about the danger of acting on that want, about the way guilt can follow a person like a shadow that cannot be shaken. Audiences recognized something in it. They might not have been able to name what it was, but they felt it. The film was not an escape from the real world. It was a mirror held up to it. The darkness on screen reflected something that was already there, just waiting to be named. What looked like entertainment was actually a conversation about the hidden life of an entire generation. Tian, number 10, The Scene in the Kitchen. Took days to film. There is a scene in The Postman Always Rings Twice where Frank and Cora talk in the kitchen of the diner. It is not a long scene. It is not a complicated scene, at least not on the surface. 2 people, 1 small room, a few lines of dialogue. But it took days to get right. The director and the 2 actors kept working through it, looking for the exact moment when the electricity between the characters would become visible on film. It is easy to write desire into a script. It is very hard to make an audience feel it in their chest. Tay Garnett tried different angles. He moved the camera closer, then further back. He asked Turner and Garfield to change the pace of their delivery, to pause in different places, to look at each other differently. The challenge was that the scene had to work on 2 levels at the same time. On the surface, it was just 2 people talking about food and work. Underneath, it was a negotiation. It was 2 people deciding something enormous without saying it out loud. When the final version was assembled, the scene looked effortless. That is the sign of great filmmaking. The work disappeared into the result. Audiences watched 2 people talking and felt the walls closing in. They felt the decision being made even before the characters made it. What took days to construct played out in what felt like a single held breath. Number 9. The ending was rewritten. Multiple times. The ending of The Postman Always Rings Twice is one of the most discussed conclusions in classic Hollywood cinema. Without giving away every detail, it involves a cruel twist of fate that brings the story full circle. But that ending was not the first one written. It was not even the second. The original drafts of the screenplay tried different ways to resolve the story. Some were more straightforward. Some felt too simple for a story that had been so complicated. The writers and the producers kept returning to Cain's novel, looking for the ending that felt true to the material while also satisfying the demands of the Hays Code. The censors needed to see the guilty punished. But the writers wanted the punishment to arrive in a way that felt genuinely devastating, not just a simple consequence, but something that carried moral weight. The final ending struck that balance in a way that surprised almost everyone involved. When it was filmed and assembled, the people in the editing room went quiet. It landed exactly right. It was cruel in a way that felt inevitable. Audiences in 1946 sat in darkened theaters and felt the floor drop out from under them. They had watched two people make terrible choices, and now they watched those choices return. Not in the way anyone expected, but in a way that made perfect sense. What felt like a twist was actually justice, wearing a different mask. Number 8. The film launched a new kind of femme fatale. Before the Postman Always Rings Twice, the dangerous woman in Hollywood films was usually obvious. She wore black. She had cold eyes. She was clearly villainous from the moment she appeared. The audience knew to distrust her immediately. Cora Smith changed all of that. Lana Turner's Cora was warm and beautiful and vulnerable. She seemed sympathetic. She seemed like someone who had been wronged by circumstance, trapped in a life she did not choose. And she was all of those things. But she was also calculating and ruthless and willing to go further than Frank ever really was. The genius of the character was that both things were true at the same time. The sympathetic woman and the dangerous woman existed inside the same person. Audiences came out of the theater arguing about Cora. Some felt sorry for her, some were frightened by her. Some felt both at once. Film scholars later pointed to Cora as one of the defining femme fatale characters of the entire noir era. She was copied, referenced, and reimagined in dozens of films over the decades that followed. But none of them quite captured what Lana Turner found in the character, that particular mixture of genuine feeling and genuine ruthlessness. Cora wanted to be free. She was willing to do anything to get there. Those two facts together, held in one person at the same time. That was something new. That was something the movies had not seen before in quite that way. What looked like a stock character became an entirely original creation. Number 7. The cat in the film was a real working actor. There is a cat in The Postman Always Rings Twice. Nick Smith loved his cat. The cat appears in several scenes and serves as a kind of symbol, an innocent creature living in the middle of a story full of guilt and danger. The cat had to be trained to hit specific marks, to sit still during dialogue, to respond to cues on command. Animal wranglers worked with the cat for weeks before filming began. On a movie set, animals are unpredictable. They do not understand that there is a script. They do not know that a director is watching. The cat would sometimes walk in the wrong direction, sit in the wrong spot, or simply refuse to cooperate entirely. The crew had enormous patience. They worked around the cat's schedule, its mood, and its comfort level. Some of the scenes required multiple takes purely because of the animal's behavior. But when the cat performed as needed, it added something to the film that no human actor could have provided. An innocence. A sense of ordinary domestic life going on, completely unaware of the darkness surrounding it. Nick's love for the cat told the audience everything they needed to know about Nick's character. And the cat's indifference to everything happening around it became one of the film's quiet, painful jokes. What seemed like a small background detail carried more meaning than most of the dialogue. Number 6. James M. Cain. Saw the film and had complicated feelings. James M. Cain had watched Hollywood mishandle his work before. His novel Double Indemnity had been adapted, and that had gone reasonably well. But The Postman Always Rings Twice had been sitting in Hollywood's hands for over a decade, and Cain had complicated feelings about what they would do with it. When the film was finally finished and Cain sat down to watch it, he had a response that was difficult to categorize. He appreciated the performances. He respected the craft of the production. He could see that the people involved had tried to do right by his story. But he also felt the weight of everything that had been removed, softened, or changed. The rawest edges of his novel, the things that had made it scandalous and dangerous and completely alive, had been smoothed down by the requirements of the Hays Code. The film was good, but the book was something else entirely. Cain never fully made peace with the gap between what he had written and what appeared on screen. He was proud that his work had reached a wider audience. He was grateful for the recognition. But there was always, in his public statements about the adaptation, a sense of something held back, something he knew was missing. Writers often feel this way about adaptations of their work. The best of them learn to see the film and the book as separate things, each true in its own way. Whether Cain ever got there fully, only he knew for certain. What looked like a tribute to his vision was also quietly a departure from it. Number 5. The film was remade. But the original held its ground. The Postman Always Rings Twice was remade in 1981 with Jack Nicholson and Jessica Lange. By that point, the Hays Code had been gone for years. The remake could show everything the original was forced to hide. It could be explicit. It could be raw. It could go to every place the 1946 version was forbidden from going. And yet something remarkable happened. When critics and audiences compared the two films, many of them still preferred the original. Not because it was more explicit, it was far less so, but because the tension in the original came from restraint. When two people cannot touch, cannot say what they mean, cannot act on what they feel, the audience fills in the space with their imagination. That imagination is always more powerful than anything a camera can show. Tay Garnett understood this instinctively. The older film used shadows, glances, pauses, and the architecture of the frame to communicate everything the dialogue could not. The remake could say everything directly. And by saying everything directly, it lost something essential. The heat of desire needs a little darkness to burn bright. The 1946 version understood that completely. What looked like a limitation was actually the film's greatest strength. Number 4. Lana Turner's personal life. Mirrored the film in haunting ways, life and art crossed paths for Lana Turner in a way that still haunts film historians. Years after The Postman Always Rings Twice made her a major star, Turner's personal life became tabloid news in one of the most shocking stories of the late 1950s. The details were different from the film's story. But the broad outlines, a dangerous relationship, a violent act, guilt, and consequence, echoed the themes of Cora Smith's story in an uncomfortable way. People who had watched Turner as Cora could not help seeing the connection. The woman who had played a character defined by desire and its terrible costs found herself living out a different version of the same drama. Turner herself never spoke about the connection publicly in any direct way. She was a private person beneath the glamour, and the events of her real life were far more painful than anything in a movie script. But cinema historians have returned to the overlap again and again, finding in it something they struggle to explain. It is the kind of coincidence that makes people feel uneasy, as if a story told on screen somehow seeped into the life of the person telling it. What was performance became, in some shadow way, prophecy. That was never the intention. It was never anyone's plan. It was just one of those dark mirrors that life sometimes holds up without warning. Number 3. The film changed. How America talked about desire on screen. Before The Postman Always Rings Twice, the romantic tension in Hollywood films tended to be clean. People fell in love in ways that were beautiful and proper. Even when things went wrong, the desire itself was usually presented as something noble. Cain's story in Tay Garnett's film changed the conversation. For the first time in a mainstream Hollywood production, desire was shown as something that could destroy a person. Not because it was sinful in an abstract religious sense, but because it could cloud a person's judgment completely. It could make a smart person do something stupid. It could make a good person do something terrible. It could pull two people together so completely that everything outside that pull, family, safety, decency, the future, simply stopped existing. Audiences in 1946 recognized this. They had felt something like it, or known someone who had. And here it was on the big screen, dressed in white shorts and lit like a dream. After The Postman Always Rings Twice, films were allowed to be more honest about this kind of desire. The door Cain had opened with his novel, and that Garnett pushed open wider with his film, let in a new kind of story. A story where the heart was not always heroic, where love and destruction could be the same force wearing different faces. What looked like transgression was actually truth. Number 2, the black and white photography was a deliberate moral choice. Sidney Wagner was the cinematographer on The Postman Always Rings Twice, and the look he created for the film was not accidental. Every decision about light and shadow was made in service of the story's moral landscape. The film uses bright, almost harsh light in its outdoor scenes, that glaring California sun beating down on the diner, on the road, on Frank and Cora as they go about their plans. And then, in contrast, the interiors are full of shadows. The diner at night, the rooms where secrets are discussed, the spaces where decisions are made. This contrast was intentional. The world of public life, the world where appearances had to be maintained, was lit brightly. The world of private desire and private guilt was kept in shadow. Wagner and Garnett worked closely to make sure every frame carried this tension. The camera was positioned to let light fall in just the right way, to let darkness creep in at just the right moment. There is a reason that black and white photography suited these noir stories so perfectly. Color would have made the world feel more comfortable, more familiar. In black and white, everything became a little harder, a little colder, a little more honest. The shadows in the film were not decorative, they were psychological. They were the visible shape of things that could not be said. What looked like a stylistic choice was actually the film thinking out loud. Number 1, the film's legacy outlasted almost everything around it. When The Postman Always Rings Twice was released in 1946, it was a commercial success and a critical conversation starter. But no one predicted quite how long it would last. Decades passed, film styles changed, color replaced black and white. The Hays Code was eventually dismantled. New generations of filmmakers came along who had never heard of Tay Garnett, who grew up watching entirely different kinds of movies. And yet The Postman Always Rings Twice survived. It appeared on best of lists. It was studied in film schools. It was screened in retrospectives and revival houses. Directors who later became legends cited it as an influence. Writers who shaped American fiction in the second half of the 20th century pointed back to James M. Cain. The film endured because it was honest about something that never changes. Human beings want things they cannot have. Sometimes they are willing to do terrible things to get those things. And when they do, the consequences follow. Not always immediately, not always in the way they expected. But they follow. That truth was old when Cain wrote his novel. It was old when Tay Garnett put it on film. And it is old now. But films that tell old truths with enough skill, enough feeling, and enough courage become something more than entertainment. They become part of the way we understand ourselves. The Postman Always Rings Twice is one of those films. What looked like a story about two people became a story about everyone. Bonus fact: the version Europe saw first here is something that almost no one outside of film history circles knows. Before Hollywood made its version of The Postman Always Rings Twice in 1946, European filmmakers had already adapted James M. Cain's novel, Twice. A French version called Le Dernier Tournant was made in 1942. An Italian version called Ossessione was directed by the legendary Luchino Visconti in 1943. Ossessione, in particular, was a remarkable piece of work. Visconti set the story in the rural Italian countryside instead of California. He filmed it with a gritty realism that was ahead of its time, raw, unglamorous, and deeply felt. It was one of the earliest films to use what would later be called neorealist techniques. It showed ordinary people in ordinary surroundings, struggling with extraordinary passions. The film was banned in Italy under the fascist government of the time. It was too dark, too honest, too critical of the comfortable picture the regime wanted to project. Visconti nearly faced serious consequences for making it. After the war, Ossessione became recognized as a masterpiece, a film that helped invent a new way of telling stories. And it had been made from the same novel that Hollywood spent 12 years being afraid to touch. When the American version arrived in 1946, most American audiences had no idea that a European film had already found the soul of the story. Different country, different language, different setting. Same truth. Old story, told again with new eyes. The past lived again through art. The Postman Always Rings Twice is more than a crime story. It is a story about the human heart, about how want can grow so large that it swallows everything else, about how two people can make each other feel alive in a way that leads only toward destruction, about how guilt follows a person silently, the way a shadow follows you even when you are trying to run. What Cain wrote in 1934, what Garnett filmed in 1946, what Turner and Garfield brought to life together. It still speaks. It speaks because the things it is about do not go away. Desire does not go away. Consequence does not go away. The longing for something better and the terrible cost of reaching for it without care. Those things are as present now as they were in the middle of the last century. Great films survive because they carry this kind of truth inside them. They survive because they make us feel something we recognize, even when the clothes and the cars and the language are from another time. Every old film is a message in a bottle sent from the past. When you watch it, you are reading that message. You are hearing a voice from decades ago saying, "We were here, we felt this, we understood something about what it means to be alive and wanting and afraid." If these stories moved you, if these secrets surprised you, then there are more waiting. Subscribe, and we will keep opening the bottles together. Every movie hides a truth, and we will keep uncovering them, one story at a time.